Hello everybody and welcome back to another The Walking Dead The Ones Who Live video. And with the limited series now over, it's time to rank every episode from worst to best. And as always, just remember this is just my personal opinion, and if you have a different opinion, I'll let you know your rankings down in the comments below. And with that out of the way, let's jump right into this with last place is episode 6. This is by far the worst episode of the 6 episodes, and it's easily because this episode has terrible pacing. They try and tell way too much in only 40 minutes. It needs to be a longer episode, or at least 2-parters. And they completely ruin the ending of the CRM arc. Major General Bill gives us time to shine in this episode, and then he's immediately killed off. This is still a good episode, don't get me wrong. It's just they had so much to do in this episode, and because you're not giving it maybe an hour or an hour and a half runtime, which is what I think this episode really needed, we then just got rushed for everything, and then the CRM was just dealt with like that. It was just so poorly executed in some aspects, but with the Rick and Michonne aspects of the story and the ending, it was well executed. It seems they tried to do just too much in this one episode. At 5th place is episode 1, and this is a bit controversial, but this episode, for me, I don't like them cutting off Rick's hand at the start of the episode. I think it should be something we built up towards, and I feel like the episode has a pacing that's a bit too fast. This episode has a lot to do, and I think it tells that story well, because we have to find out where Rick's gone for all these years, what Rick's been doing, stuff like that, so it tells that well. I just think this episode is missing out some key moments, like we never see Rick's first reaction to this CRM. That's a big moment that we all wanted. We never got it. We pick up 5 years after the event, and we don't know what happens within that timeline. It's more of a case, damned if you do, damned if you don't. They're trying to give fan service, but annoys some people. They have to tell where Rick's been all these years, but if they tell too much of it, people might say the pacing is too bad. If they tell too little of it, I think they did good, and it's the best they could have done. However, there's always going to be some issues, so this is going to be my second least favourite episode, just because I think another episode would have been a better episode 1. Number 4 is episode 5, and this episode has some really strong things, like Bring Us Back Gabriel was absolutely amazing. Those are the best scenes of this episode. My biggest issue with this episode is that I feel like they had Jadis be too weak. Rick and Michonne felt very unstoppable this episode, and the episode was way too predictable. At the start of this episode, you could predict how the episode was going to end. There was not enough twists, I feel. This episode, as I said, predictable. The way they dealt with Jadis in this episode was well near the end. I just didn't like how Jadis was like, hey, Rick and Michonne, I'm going to wake you up, and then I'm going to kill you. And then she immediately loses the upper hand, and the episode is about hunting her down. I just thought this episode could have been done better, and you could have maybe changed things up a little just to make this episode a bit more exciting. And now moving on, number 3 is episode 3, and this episode is really where I say the story starts. Episode 3, now that we have Rick and Michonne together, is where everything's coming together, and we get some answers to some questions. But this episode is really about setting up the story, setting up the mystery of the summit, the Epsilon briefing. I really enjoyed this episode because it's the start of the story. I might not like how it ended as much, but the start of the story is very promising, and I really do like the Rick and Michonne dynamic. This is why I say it's almost at its strongest in this season, or this show, should I say, is because these characters are getting close to their breaking point. Michonne wants to leave, but Rick is too terrified to leave. And I really like how Rick's trying to get rid of Michonne at every possible time, but Michonne's sticking around. I think the worst part of this episode is just the sudden cliffhanger. This episode has the worst cliffhanger, but that shows how good this episode is, where the only bad thing I can say is the very end has a stupid cliffhanger. Number 2 is episode 2, and this is the Michonne episode where we see Michonne's point of view of her going to find Rick. And I think this would have been a better episode 1, to be honest. This episode is paced amazingly. I really like the story because it's not just we start with Michonne and we end with Michonne meeting Rick. I like how we start Michonne immediately after the events of Walking Dead Season 10 Episode 13. We see why she's been gone so long. I like Nat. He's definitely one of my favourite characters in this show. They developed him so well in just one episode. The only issue I have is they killed off Nat as well. This episode, or should I say, this show has a really bad issue of introducing a character and then killing them off. They did the same with Okafor. They've done it with basically every other character other than Rick and Michonne. But this this episode, what I really like about it is that we get the big Rick and Michonne reunion, which is absolutely amazing. And then the episode carries on and we see Michonne's first interaction with the CRM. We see how people enter the CRM. I really like Rick and Michonne's interactions this episode because they haven't seen each other in years. It's just very, very cool to see these characters finally reunite. Like, they get little glimpses of what their past has been like when Michonne looks at Rick's hand. It's filled with lots of very good little scenes, and the ending is amazing. This definitely has the best ending in the 6 episodes, where Rick opens the door and you have to build up and it's Jadis. Really, really well done. I say this episode has basically no flaws. The only flaw is Nat's death. That's how good this episode is. I just really, really think this should have been episode 1. It would have been so much better than the episode we got. It would have had more intrigue as well, like, oh, where's Rick? We're with Michonne trying to find out where Rick is. Episode ends with us finding Rick. We see a bit of the CRM, and then episode 2 should have been Rick's point of view. We go back in time, see how he got to that moment of finding Michonne. That's just how I think this show should have been, in my opinion. And now number 1 is episode 4. By far, this is definitely the best episode we've got in the Walking the Universe in years. This episode is absolutely fantastic. It's what we wanted since they got back together in episodes 1/2. And as these characters now sat in a room and they talk about where they've been, what's been happening to them through all these years. And this is where our characters break. At the end of the last episode, they're like, we hate each other, or Rick's trying to get rid of Michonne. This episode is them at their lowest. And this episode is fantastic. Definitely has the best performances in the entire show. Andrew Lincoln and Danai Gurira's performance in this episode is fantastic. It's amazing how good this episode was when it was Michonne's, or should I say Danai Gurira's, first writing and directing debut. Absolutely phenomenal. I am so happy we got an episode dedicated to them talking about what their lives have been like, because we get some absolutely amazing scenes and amazing performances. I have to say, someone has to win an award. I'm gonna say it right now, someone has to win an award for this show and for this episode, because these characters gave it their all in this episode. But this is just my opinion, so please tell me down below, what are your rankings from episode 1 to 6? Which is the worst, which is the best? And I'll talk to you later. So goodbye, peace out, see you later.